If you were to say that Warsaw's Old Town is centuries old, you'd be right. Well, sort of. It's actually one of Europe's most convincing historical recreations. What you see today, the cobblestones, the facades, and even the castle, was painstakingly reconstructed by architects, artists, and volunteers. And if you look closely, you can still find the clues that reveal it's not as old as it looks. So come along and I'll show you. After the 1944 Warsaw Uprising, the Germans retaliated and leveled this entire neighborhood to the ground. 90% of the Old Town's buildings was destroyed. The Old Town after the war was quite literally a pile of rubble. Almost immediately after the fighting stopped, groups of architects, artists, and volunteers began to rebuild the city. But they first had to dig out the Old Town Square. The rubble was moved outside the city center and shaped into hills. If you've ever visited Moczedło Park, for example, to sled or to stargaze, and you had an amazing view of the city, well, you've been standing on remnants of pre-war Warsaw. And that really goes for any major hill outside Warsaw's center. There's a good chance you're standing on rubble. Today, the rebuilt Old Town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it's not for its preservation. It's actually for its reconstruction. You might miss this when you're just walking through the Old Town, but if you take a closer look at the facades of the buildings, you'll notice new brickwork and plaster. These elements are basically 70 or 80 years old at the most. If you do want to catch a glimpse of the Old Town, there are still a few spots where you can see the original building foundation with the new brickwork above it. The darker, older brick looks beat up and weathered, and then transitions to a different red of the new brick. Post-war architects used old plans and photos to reconstruct the area. Some decorative elements, like the sgraffito on the facades, were simplified. The designs on these buildings were decorative elements that were layered and added on to the original construction for hundreds of years. One of my favorite designs in the Old Town is right in the Old Town Square. This building, called the Tenement House Under the Lion, has stood in this same spot since 1428. Over the centuries, it underwent plenty of rebuilds and redesigns. The building that currently stands is reconstructed from the skeleton left by the bombings of the war, but it retains some of its pre-war elements, including the majority of its front facade. What makes this building so special are the polychrome paintings that were almost completely lost to time. They were added in 1928 and 1929 by the famous Art Deco artist Zofia Stryjeńska. She painted a number of them on the building, but unfortunately these two are the only ones that survived. If you're walking through the Old Town, you'll definitely walk past St. John's Archcathedral. But did you know that this was entirely recreated after the war? It was originally a 14th century cathedral that served as a coronation and burial site of many dukes of Mazovia. But unfortunately during the war it was completely destroyed. 90% of its walls were gone, making it impossible to fully rebuild after the war and restore to its former glory. The front facade was rebuilt, but based entirely on 17th century illustrations and drawings that depicted the original 14th century construction. The facade you see today doesn't actually look like it did right before the World War. And the castle? Well, the castle in the Old Town is a complete reconstruction. What stands today was rebuilt in the 1970s and completed only in 1984 due to the cost of materials and the sheer size of the castle. The money to fund the project was raised completely from public donations. What little survived of the castle was used to recreate the rest of it. It now functions as a museum which houses a collection of paintings, furniture, and tapestries that are priceless for Polish history. If you wander the Old Town, you can still find areas that are covered in bullet holes, like these on brick walls. And near Castle Square, you'll find the broken Zygmunt's column that was erected in 1644, and a plaque noting its destruction 300 years later in 1944. All of these pieces are living history and tell the story of what is probably the youngest old town in Europe. But most visitors don't notice these hidden clues. How about you? Have you visited the Old Town and noticed these details? If you had never heard that they were recreated, would you have known? If you want to discover more Polish history and culture, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching.